All right. Well, hello, Aya. It's been lovely catching up with you for almost an hour before our
Yeah, it's been
second call.
awesome.
Um, I'll give a brief intro and then we can kind of jump right into it. So today I have my really good friend, Aya Kaur, and we're going to be talking about breath work and plant medicine and how the two make a perfect marriage, in my opinion, and probably hers. But basically, the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because the benefits of deep breathing are many. You know, the moment we close our eyes and bring our attention to the breath, distinct, positive, physiological, even spiritual effects start to begin. You know, our heart rate slows, cardiopulmonary stress is decreased, there's a decrease in metabolic activity, blood sugar, lactate levels, muscle tension, skin conductivity. And the sum total of these positive changes is an increase in well being, a sense of coming home. And there's also a shift on the emotional level, which is accompanied by a shift in attention. We're aware that the concerns that held us so tightly before have receded, and we sense a powerful presence or stillness. And we're able to get rid of tension in our bodies, see how calm or active our nervous systems are, how we use or misuse the power that we have within us. And breath work is also a big part of my own personal story. Years ago, I was suffering from regular panic attacks, insomnia, chronic anxiety, chronic pain, and stress. And pharmaceuticals, psychotherapy didn't really help. So I turned to breath work, which calmed me down in a way that meditation and yoga hadn't. And I experimented with many different methods, some of which you probably heard, like Wim Hof, holotropic breath work, ujjayi, pranayama, alternate nostril breathing. And eventually I found a good practice that worked for my body, my mind, and now my own plant medicine practices as well. And so in this episode, I want to sit down with Aya. Um, First and foremost, she's a good friend of mine, like I mentioned. We met down in the Amazon jungle. I guess it would be over a year ago,
Hmm.
um, of all places. Well, first in a bus in Iquitos, and where we talked about trauma and spiritual awakenings, and then in a rainforest while we were doing an ayahuasca apprenticeship and several plant dietas.
Yeah.
And professionally, Aya is a trauma informed ayahuasca preparation and integration coach whom I trust and love very much. And she's served in the mental health field for over 10 years. She's a seasoned therapist, alternative healing practitioner. Today, she assists individuals in preparing for their journey ahead with ayahuasca, as well as unpacking their experiences when they come back home. And again, the reason I wanted to talk to Aya, besides her being a wonderful person, is because she utilizes many of the modalities and tools such as mindfulness, internal family systems, somatic awareness, and chief among them, breath work.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just kick it off with a basic question. You know, what do we
Yeah.
mean by breath work? What is it, and why is it so valuable?
Yeah. I mean, I like why you were just like kind of going through your intro and talking about what breathing does. You were listing all these like really incredible benefits with lowering the heart rate and calming the central nervous system. And I mean, that right there, calming the central nervous system, right? Um, so yeah, so breath work, right? Like you kind of already mentioned, um, is anything from that deep breathing, deep diaphragmatic breathing, breathing into the belly, to something that's more activating, like a Wim Hof breath, something that's like, so and then a more transformational breath work, which I'll get to that in a second. But um really for me, like, and it sounds like you too, what I found is that it really helps have control over regulating our central nervous system. And overall, it's a very empowering practice. um I spent a lot of time in my fight or flight system and I had no idea how to control it. and that's been a part of my journey, like you is like breath work. I found that before I found ayahuasca. And a lot of people, when I work with them who are wanting to take ayahuasca or have taken ayahuasca, they're wanting to heal, to grow, to expand. And when I say heal, I mean, I'm like, there's so many things we can go into, like childhood trauma, anxiety, depression, codependency, perfectionism, addictions, all of this. And all of this usually has like a central nervous system dysregulation component to it. So that's why the breath work is actually very foundational in my program. That's the first thing I check in with somebody, or we establish right off the bat, is like, hey, time to get into a regular daily breathing practice. Because this is one of the ways, like, if you want to do deep work, if you want to grow, I like to say you got to know how this meat suit operates, because if you don't, you're going to be really confused and frustrated, you know? And if you pour some ayahuasca on top of a dysregulated central nervous system, it's not going to be a fun ride,
Right.
to say the least, right?
Right.
So we come into regulation, and there's the other tools that you mentioned as well, like the internal family systems, and maybe we will get into that today, maybe we won't. But so there's the functional breathing, to regulate the central nervous system, and then the transformational breath work, which is a non-ordinary state of consciousness process where someone circular breathes, much like almost exactly as you do in Wim Hof, but no breath holds for up to 30 minutes to
Mm.
paired emotionally evocative music to create a peak experience. And just really quick brief history on that. That was born out of Stan Grof's work with holotropic breath work. Um, when the LSD research was no longer legal, and he decided, I got to create a way to give people these experiences that are legal. So he turned to breath work. And that's also what I've really loved about the transformational breath work, is like giving my clients and my students ways that they can reach peak experiences that are in the comfort of their home. They don't got to wait till the next ceremony. They could do that now. So
Right.
once again, it's about giving the person control, giving the person empowerment so they can activate healing, growth, or discovery pretty much in their own body. So I hope that answered
Right.
your
Right.
question.
It does, and I love how you put a very fundamental uh, perspective on it, because breath is the first thing and the last thing that we do in our lives, and it's the thing that we do every
Yeah. Oh my
day, where
gosh.
our body is, and we bring our bodies with us everywhere we go. We might not be in ceremony, but we're always breathing.
That's right.
And if we can breathe right, if we can regulate ourselves and feel like we're in control of our bodies and our minds and our emotions, well, that to me seems to be far more positive than a lot of plant medicines or um, other work that we kind of alluded to at the beginning.
Totally.
But it lays the groundwork for everything after that. And if you do choose to explore plant medicines, if you do choose to explore mindfulness and meditation, whatever,
Yeah.
then that plays in perfectly.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful adjunct, but kind of a necessary prerequisite.
I totally agree with that. I love how you reiterated the foundation of it. And yeah, when we're not in ceremony, we're breathing. I love how you said that.
Yeah.
Quick story. I mean, I guess because every time I talk about this stuff or even teach on it, like I always have this story in my own head. I'm like, this must sound boring, or like this sounds too simple.
Mhm.
So it's like, I think, and I think even as Westerners, we find simple kind of boring. But breathing and our central nervous system is actually the one of the most profound things happening at all times. I mean, it's actually happening right now, like in my body, my central nervous system is in a particular state and it's affecting my perception of how I'm feeling about myself in this moment and how I'm perceiving you. And, you know, so it's very powerful, and our ability to tap into that, tap into presence and mindfulness and breath, at any given time is really, really important, because it's like set and setting is always happening. We use those
Right.
terms a lot, set and setting, with ayahuasca or psychedelics or plant medicines. And it's, and so the way we can bend that or shape that or heal that is through the practice of being connected, and feeling safe to be connected to our bodies, which a lot of us who are struggling with trauma, or just weren't taught to regulate, right? If we didn't grow up in a house where someone said, hey, sweetie, it's okay, just breathe. And when we have these big emotions when we're kids, right? And someone's shutting us down or telling us we're not good enough or whatever message we get, then that gets, locked in. So as you can see, it's like complicated, but that's kind of the dichotomy I'm trying to mirror. It's like, I know it sounds simple, but it actually is the gate to, man, so many things. And just to kind of reiterate briefly, really quick, is like, you know, um, like the more I'm trying to think about how to say the words, like the more we're connected with that breath and that presence, like even way before we go take a medicine, that's all affecting your set and how present you can be and like how much you can actually take in. And so that's so important in the preparation process. And I always say a good preparation leads to an excellent integration, so and that's something we all learn, for continuous practitioners of this work to, kind of constantly be refining that, and like what works for me now and maybe what works for me back then doesn't work now or whatever. But I just wanted to share that this stuff is like really like mind blowing once you actually get into it. But when you're kind of sitting there having a conversation, oh, just breathe. It's really in the direct experience of applying it that you'll find the gifts. You can't do it just by talking, just because, or just like, with plant medicines, you can only get so much out of talking about it, right? It's a
Right.
direct experience practice.
Uh-huh.
So that's where the gifts lie, is like, doing the work. I guess that's why they
Right.
call it breath work.
Yeah. It
So
is work. Yeah, it is work. And sometimes you have to sit down and do it when you don't feel like it. And especially if you don't feel like it, right? But
yeah.
let's pull the thread of the simple and the complicated, because,
Mhm.
it lays the foundation. It's something that we do all the time with us, and it regulates such a core part of us, our nervous system, our thoughts and perceptions.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's very complicated. Something, as you were talking, kind of jumped into my mind, which was the reparenting aspect. And if we
Love
weren't
it.
taught as children how to regulate ourselves through breath work, we start to awaken to the fact, maybe if that's our story or our case, that we have no idea as adults how to regulate ourselves. And I don't know, maybe we could get a little bit of your story on how
Oh
you
yeah.
realized that you
Whew.
maybe weren't so regulated, because it took
Mm-hmm.
me a major series of crises
Yeah.
to understand that I had no idea how to regulate myself. And part of the reparenting process was breathing correctly, was proper belly breathing, especially.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There's so many layers here. So yeah, I mean, and this is another foundational thing I teach with my students is inner child and reparenting work, because that's also something we really can't ignore when we're, I mean, I can't speak to anything else but really ayahuasca, because that's the thing I specialize in. That we will be confronted with our unresolved family of origin issues in this work. It's just like, and if you think you're going to be able to hide from it in the medicine space, like that's just not the case, right? So, um, so my it's like I found ayahuasca in 2016, but I went into EMDR therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, and a 12-step group called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, where I learned the words inner child and reparenting, you know. Um, so this was all my preparation, even though I wasn't consciously preparing, but this was all the work I was doing before I had found ayahuasca. But
Mm-hmm.
I basically realized I was really dysregulated when I was 27, and this was the moment. Like, it's like I just graduated with my master's. I bought a new car. I started working at this fancy treatment center, and in my mind, my whole life, I said, when I get X, Y, and Z, because I grew up in a family that was very emotionally unintelligent, but very performance driven. So in my mind, when I had X, Y, and Z, everything like bam. And when I had all those things, I was like, I still hate myself, and it was very like ego deflating because the whole time I thought when I achieve X, Y, and Z, then I'll finally feel whole. And, that's when I was at this treatment center, it was an inpatient for addiction and trauma. So as I'm teaching there, we're going through Brene Brown material about shame resiliency, and I'm reading this material, and I was like, oh my god, I've never. I mean, I like you just heard me say, I graduated with a master's in social work. I never had learned what the emotion shame was, and as I'm teaching this material to people, I'm like, I am full of shame. I'm not enough all the time. I feel like I'm not enough, and that was the catalyst for just because once the dots started clicking and they were showing us, like, when you go through the training, you got to go through the client experience. So all the floodgates just started opening, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
shit, man, I've been living an illusion, a facade. This not was not fun, fun awakening. But then right after that, you know, I went to an EMDR training, and then that opened the gate to go see an EMDR therapist. And then my pesky neighbor, who became later my sponsor, was like, hey, you need to get to an ACA meeting. And I'm like, what? And she just, I don't know, she could see it in me that I was just frazzled all the time, and I was like, this woman's crazy. But it saved my life. So, it was just the perfect combination of these events, and also me being ready to be like, damn, I don't know anything. I thought I knew
Mm-hmm.
what I was doing and like what this was all about, this whole life thing. So it was very painfully humbling to be like, shit, I got a lot of shit to work on, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right, and that almost speaks to the wounded healer archetype, that comes up a lot in healing work, right? Like, we see a lot of people who haven't gone through the experience themselves of
Totally.
working on their deepest issues.
Totally.
And so to me, it shows a sign of maturity and growth if someone has gone through that process themselves. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, no, almost always, it takes years,
Yeah.
and I don't think it ever stops. I don't really, I hope it doesn't.
Right, right.
And continually trying to work on yourself while you're helping other people so that at least you can maintain that level of health.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting. Did you start to fall in love with breath work, or was it sort of like a love at first sight, or did you
Right, right.
slowly get into it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, yeah, I like how you reflected on the wounded healer, and um and I definitely think my journey being a therapist was like an initiation that I
Mm,
didn't really ask for, but it happened anyway.
hmm.
So um because I thought, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna be a therapist. This is gonna be awesome. I'm gonna help people, and then like, rah. But so back to the breath work. So my breath work and mindfulness practice is came actually much earlier. So my first introduction to mindfulness was in 2009. So it was like way, way before, but still my practice didn't really take off until I started doing my deep trauma work in like 2015.
Uh-huh.
So like much, much, much later. So like, I went through this training where we learned about mindfulness and observing, non-judgmental breathing. And I didn't really take it seriously. I thought it was boring. I was like, man, this is too easy. Like there's this, it's like I wasn't a believer. I was like really skeptic, but and I wasn't practicing. Like I was in my early 20s, and um but I think like the more and more connected I became to my own story and what I was going through, and like coming out of the denial of what I had been hiding from for a really long time, that's when I was like, this stuff works. And I've been like hanging up the phone too much, like, oh no, I don't need that, or whatever denial pattern was within me, that's my
Right.
best guess,
Uh-huh.
um but it really wasn't until um 2016, when I started going to Kundalini yoga classes and I discovered Breath of Fire. Like
Mm.
that was, I feel like, the first, I guess, real true awakening around breath work, because Breath of Fire is it's very like intense, and like I'll never forget, I was in that Kundalini yoga class and I got like higher, higher, higher in the sky than I've ever been. And I was like, I just did this with my breath. This is
Right.
nuts.
Right.
So that's when I started really like, and I started doing more body work and slowing down and appreciating like, oh wow, I can regulate my central nervous system with a deep breath. And um that's when I started getting more into like all the healing work. So I started to appreciate more and more. And then in 2020 I was introduced to the Wim Hof, and that once again was another awakening. And then the same year I was introduced to Michael Stone, who trained with Stan Groff and now has a program called neurodynamic breathwork. And when I went through that experience, I was like, holy cow, like this is incredible. And because I had done so much ayahuasca work by then, I could really see the parallels. I'm like, oh, this is all connected, So then honestly, I'm honestly figuring it out as I'm telling you. I feel like the more I became connected to my healing and I leaned more into it, I saw the value more and more and more. And the science that has come out within the last 5 to 10 years is undeniable. So I think it's been a pairing of my personal experience and then these geniuses like Dr. Stephen Porges and Dr. Peter Levine, that you just can't deny the things they're presenting. You're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what's happening into my body, or that's what's
Right.
happening in my body. I'm going into fight or flight. I am freezing, dissociating. Oh, by breathing, you can just ground yourself. Whoa, you
No.
know? So anyway, I know I'm kind of giving you a long answer, but that's the whole journey. I feel like it's been a combination of experience, application, and science in myself and in my students, to see the results in them, and they come back and they're like, oh, I have this trigger and I totally could ground myself through it. And I'm like, that's power. That's
Right.
someone's sovereignty. That's someone's enlightenment in that
Right.
breath.
Right. And
So
we can read about these things, but once not only we need to have a felt experience. We need to have
yes.
a direct felt knowing of what that is doing for us. You can read about being outside of a window of tolerance, right?
Yes.
A great term to understand being dysregulated. in hypo or hyper arousal.
Yes.
And people who experience this daily are all too familiar with that. So they might have that direct experience, but not have the intellectual understanding. And vice
Right.
versa. They might have an intellectual understanding of regulation, but no direct experience feeling that.
That's a
Right.
good
And
point.
I think what you're talking about actually is a great segue. I wanted to
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
ask you about polyvagal theory, because you
Yeah.
mentioned Dr. Stephen Porges, and who incidentally, I think he coined the term neuroception,
Yes,
and
yes.
that's the process which, as you know, controls our vagus nerve, that uh, heart, throat, facial muscle, internal organ nerve that helps our digestion and everything related to fight,
Right.
flight, freeze. And so I guess the question there would be, how do we use intellectual concepts like
Mm-hmm.
polyvagal theory
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to then give us a direct experience, um, in our psychoeducation, so
Yeah.
that we can respond to emotions and physiological states, or
Mm-hmm.
in plant medicine ceremonies,
Yes.
or all of the above.
No, no. So exactly, yeah. So usually when I take somebody through this initiation of their meat suit, I guess you could call it, like, because I'm pretty cut and dry with people, I send them this chart of their central nervous system, and I first explain, I teach, and then we go through exercises so they can have the direct experience. So we do, and this is actually, it's very commonly used in a somatic experiencing. It's called pendulation. So you have somebody have in one state, usually we start out in a calm state, and we do an exercise where we drop like a visualization and a soothing visualization, and I have them actually track and notice what they're feeling in their body. I feel calm. I feel joyous when I'm at, maybe they're at a forest and they're going through the whole thing, right? And then I have them think about something stressful. So not anything too crazy in the beginning, not like we don't need to go to a traumatic event, but just like think about um, giving a presentation. Think about being late to something, so I have them pendulate into that. I'm like, okay, what are you noticing now? Um, I'm noticing that I'm getting stressed out, my heart is racing. So I'm having them track all of that, and then I'm like, okay, so stay in that, just notice that. And then I have them go back into, that calm place. So that's just one exercise, but you give them direct experiences of what it's like to be resourced and in my body, and what is it like to actually feel myself and track myself go into a stressed out state. So it's, you kind of mentioned the stuck on and the stuck off, or the hypo and hyper arousal. And people who come to me that are, it's actually kind of rare because a lot of people who take ayahuasca have already done a lot of work before they come to me. But, that's just been my experience. But even when I was a therapist, I definitely got, so really the goal in those experiences is like resourcing them or giving them the tools to just be in that window of tolerance. So, and it is through putting them through a myriad of exercises so they can experience themselves. Um, yeah, and then I mean, so and it's like I guess I'm just trying to think of like one of the things, yeah, because with the freeze state, for example, so that's a different game, that's a different ball game than the parasympathetic when we're grounded or in the fight or flight. It's actually too much language to think about. If you just think about a green light, a yellow light, and a red light. So when you're at the red light, you're in the free state and you're totally shut off. You're frozen internally, and you don't even, like, scientifically, you don't have access to your rationale. And I think this is really, when I'm educating people on this, it's very validating, because I think most of us things that we've done in frozen states or things that we didn't do, we have a lot of shame about. I didn't speak up for myself. I didn't tell that person what I really wanted to say. I shut down. I couldn't do, I felt helpless, but once we realize that, um, that's the nature of that state and that is why it's happening. And
Mhm.
here are the order of operations to actually come down, because the central nervous system has a hierarchy. When I learned this shit, I was like fucking game changer. I was like, oh, I can stop blaming myself. This is
Mhm.
just physiology. There's nothing
Right.
wrong with me,
Right.
So when we're coming out of the free state, what I teach my students is like, you actually have to pass through the fight or flight to come back down. That's why it
Mm.
feels so uncomfortable. It's because you're like an
Mhm.
ice cube melting. And
Mhm.
so we want instant. We want to be out of there. And it's like, so in session, I take them through and simulate experiences. Obviously, you can only simulate so much, right? So we practice when we're not triggered, you know, in order to have that resourcing and that flexibility when we are triggered, you know. And same thing with ceremony. We practice this stuff outside of ceremony, so we're more ready, more tuned, more sophisticated when we're in ceremony. In the end, the analogy that I use is like it's just like building muscles in a gym, you know,
Mhm.
the flexibility of the central nervous system and the resilience of it, not getting stuck, but being able to move through in this way that's more fluid um and it's not a perfect process. So remembering to be compassionate with yourself.
Right. And it's so interesting that you mentioned being fluid because as you were speaking earlier, I was
Uh-huh.
thinking about the flow, just the flow of life and how things get blocked, whether they're emotions, something in the body, and it's all connected, right? So it's all one thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But how breath work helps to facilitate the flow where it was stopped, right? It's like, okay, let's
Yeah.
let's work through that. Let's
Yes.
get more flow. Let's get that river of life going again, rather
Yes.
than just have it be this stuck bog of experience.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not sure if that's a question or just an observation to what you
No,
said
I
because I
think I
liked
love
I really
that.
liked it.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask you actually is maybe related to this because I've noticed that plants do the same thing. They get the flow going again,
Mm. Mm.
but they do it in a very different way. And there's obviously so much that breath work and these other practices you've mentioned
Yeah.
can do.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
think there's anything that breath work can't do that plant
Hmm.
medicine helps to kind of make up for or like close the gap on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know
Because
if
I
I
don't
can
know. That's
answer
why
it,
I'm asking
Jeremy.
it. I don't know.
um, you know, yeah, I guess what's coming alive for me in this moment, which I don't even know if this is true, but you know, um, yeah, like this is just my personal experience. Like, I guess I'll explain this a little bit, but because I took ayahuasca before I had a transformational breathwork experience. So I don't know, say it happened the other way around. I couldn't tell you what would have happened, but um, my first like initial ayahuasca experiences, I would say the first five I had, um, I was doing breathing, I was doing mindfulness, I was reading about spiritual experiences, and I had not connected with what a
Mm,
spiritual experience was. Um, and I feel like the ayahuasca gave me the direct experience of who I actually am, which is a soul. I couldn't get that through breathing, or
mm,
I hadn't yet. Okay,
mm-hmm.
so um, and I don't know if that makes sense. Like I
It
read about
does.
it in a book, and the 12-step program is a spiritual program. But after I took the ayahuasca, you know, it fucking I was like, this is what they're fucking talking about. Like it's like, and so it would in it was really because I finally was separated, because what happens with ayahuasca is there's an increased mindfulness. It's scientifically shown. There's increased mindfulness during and afterwards in the afterglow phase, right? And we know this now. Like, this is science, no more woo-woo stuff. So now I'm connecting the dots. I'm like, oh, who I thought I was like, and this is my trauma, finally separated. So it's like, oh shit, there I am. Like, that's who
Right.
I actually am. So finally, it was separated enough to be like, oh, I just need to work on this. This isn't actually who I am. Now I know who I am. So, anyway, I feel like people can achieve that through transformational breath work, the kind of like the one where you're breathing for 20 to 30 minutes and you
Hmm.
are building and in creating a non-ordinary state of consciousness. But I guess I can't really say chicken or the egg because I took the ayahuasca first. So
Right.
I don't know.
No, and that corroborates what I kind of believed too, is, with breath work, you're working with your own consciousness
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
your own body. And when I drink or work with plant medicines, I'm working with the consciousness of a plant, of
A
another
helper,
being,
counsel.
and right. And
Yes.
for a moment or a long time, you're fusing consciousnesses with
Yes,
that
yes,
very intelligent being,
yes.
and learning from that being what and who you are,
Right,
and seeing. And it's not like you just abdicate or give away your own consciousness, your own self. It's a dance.
right,
It's like a
right.
conversation that we're having. But with
Yes.
breath work, it's just you
Right,
working
right.
with you, and that's incredibly empowering. However, there's no tango partner. um
Yeah. And
you
yeah,
know
totally. It's interesting because and I can never I'm never going to be able to say for sure because I took the ayahuasca before I started practicing in the breathwork space because that relationship is in the breathwork space for me. Like, I can tap into ceremony space, not fully, but
mhm,
so obviously that's my own consciousness playing into it, but it's
right.
like, so I'll never know, but
Right.
I think it is like, just to kind of, because I want to be careful because I sometimes I see, you know people putting things out there with breath work or psychedelics or plant medicines, and like I just want to, I know that plant medicines or even the deep breath work, it's not for everyone because it's not
Right.
safe.
Right.
So there's a lot of things out there for people. But since we're here talking about plant medicines,
Right.
that's what we're going to talk about. But
It's
you know what I'm
topic.
saying? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Just to keep it balanced because sometimes I'm like, we got to be careful with what we're saying. Like, the only way you'll really know, like, you won't ever do transformational breath work or ayahuasca without like a full blown pre screening to make sure you're appropriate. So,
Right. I think that's a really great point, and one that is often overshadowed by our excitement for
yes,
the potential. It's like, oh
yes,
my God, we're so gaga about
yeah,
this
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah,
But it's not 100% safe physically or psychologically.
yeah,
And, whether that's breath work and or plant medicine. Um,
totally.
and I think people get the excitement fervor from a lot of social media
Yes,
friends and people with these amazing stories,
yes,
and say, I want that too. you know
right,
I want to have that experience too, but it's that person's experience, the finger pointing at the moon, not the moon itself. Like,
right,
if you're projecting what experience that you want to have onto an experience that someone else had that was very particular to them,
right,
we need to be very careful about that. And I
yes,
sometimes fall into that trap too. So it
totally,
happens to all of us.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Everyone's experience is different, and that's good. Like, that's how it's supposed to be.
Totally.
And um and everyone's on their own journey. And yeah, so
Right.
I hope I answered your question. I know I went on a little ride, but
No, it's okay. This has been a much more free-flowing
yeah,
conversation than our last one.
yeah.
But I think it's really interesting how breath work, especially you might have mentioned rebirthing, or at least alluded to it,
Mm-hmm.
but like the letting go of who we are, this ego or personality that we have, and this life experience happens in both breathwork and plant medicine, and it can
Yes.
be very disorienting, very sometimes traumatizing to have that
Yes.
experience if we're not ready, which is why pre-screening is so important. And to have a facilitator who has both gone through that, experienced that many times often,
Yeah, yeah.
and knows how to hold space for someone who is going through that. So that's a
It's a
long-winded
good point.
way
Yeah,
of
it's a good
saying,
point.
in breathwork and plant medicine, what kind of skills, qualities, characteristics, whatever, do you think
Mm-hmm.
a good support person needs to bring to the table to someone who is a good candidate?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, because these are very, like you said, both ayahuasca and breathwork. They're expansive. They will
Mhm.
stretch us. Um, so in terms of the transformational breathwork, you know, someone who's like a good sitter or a good facilitator, like will know how to pre-screen. Like that's, I just taught my students in my program like how to do this, and like, so there's a whole process that goes into pre-screening, like gathering someone's history. Have they ever done any sort of type of inner work? Have they had any past traumas? Have they addressed those traumas? Um, there are contraindications, like if you've had a previous diagnosis of bipolar or schizophrenia and it's like hasn't been treated at all, it's not recommended. And that's just because if somebody's already in a fragile state, putting them through this experience isn't going to be good for them, at least in my opinion. Maybe other people would disagree with that, but it's like, these can be disorganizing. And if someone already feels disorganized internally, it's like, it's pouring gasoline on a fire, basically.
Right.
Um, and there's medical contraindications. So heart problems, asthma problems, those need to be screened out. Um, and having really good ethics and integrity. There's a book called The Ethics of Caring by
Hmm.
Kylia Taylor. And like, that's a really good book for anyone who's doing breath work, plant medicine work, any work where there involves a non ordinary state of consciousness, because there's a lot that's happening for that person, and we got to be aware of it as facilitators. Like, is there countertransference happening? Are they projecting something onto me? Can I hold that boundary and just like know that this has nothing to do with me, and they're just processing something,
Right.
especially in ayahuasca land. Like, people are screaming and throwing up and
Yeah.
singing and shaking. I mean, that can happen in breath work too, but sometimes there's no peace in the room. So it's like, how are you gonna hold all that? So
Right.
you as a facilitator, you know, you kind of have to be attuned to some of the chaos a little bit and be like, and know what to do in those situations. Like, is this person
Right.
just processing, or is this an actual, like, do I need to like check in on them? And
Right.
man, there's a lot to so it's like,
Right.
um so I think somebody who has been exposed to these situations and kind of has really good boundaries and ethics, and um, informed consent is like a huge part of this whole process, which, I mean, I think that goes without saying, but just explaining to the person from A to B everything that's going to happen, ins and outs,
Yeah.
so they know what to expect, you know. Um,
Which can be tricky, especially with plant
with the
medicines, because it's like,
ayahuasca.
because you're like,
You're
what do
right.
you expect? You can't have any
You're right,
expectations,
man.
and so that's a really hard line to
That's
toe, you know?
You are absolutely correct. Yeah, maybe we'll drop a whole waiver together, but it can be tricky. You're totally right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think that's why the breath work is really powerful to prepare somebody for these experiences, because you know, if they are fit for breath work, put them through that so they can experience some like a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of
Yeah.
expanding, you know, like, "Okay, did you handle that well? Okay,
Right.
cool. Like, let's do that some more," you know, because once we get into this space, you know, it's just going to be more expanding and more, you know, yeah, I mean, that's how in my mind, in my worldview, like how to appropriately prepare somebody as much as possible. I mean, you can't, like you said,
Right.
there's really things we don't know that's going to happen.
Right.
But can we at minimum prepare somebody to have the skills to handle a wave, you know, of
Right.
whatever is happening?
Resourcing them.
Overstimulate it. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Right.
so when they're in the space, you can cue them, hey, remember your breath, you know, so they can access that, you know. I mean, I know there's going to be times where you can't because they're fully blasted,
Right.
but it is tough. You're right.
It's tough. And something that like kind of hopped in my mind, it was like a lot of the indigenous wisdom traditions, at least in my purview, don't do
Yeah.
much screening. And you know, people feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in this
Yeah,
case,
right.
but it seems to be more of a Western approach. And again, my assumptions in this could be wrong. Um, you know, we do so much in allopathic medicine to
Right.
screen and intake forms, all that kind of stuff. So that seems to be part of our culture. Um, Whereas if you're sitting with ayahuasca, wachuma, mushrooms, you know, a lot of earth medicines,
Right.
um, you don't necessarily see that a lot or at all. And I'm wondering, you know, is that just a cultural difference? What's lost in the experience, or what might be gained?
Right.
Just your thoughts on those
Yeah.
differences, right?
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I've been to the jungle. Well, we went, you know, we went for 2 months, and there was a pre-screening, like a mini pre-screening, you know, um, and with other people I've sat with, there's been a pre-screening. I mean, I think what you're saying is like within the families and the lineages, right? There's no
Mhm.
pre-screening. It's like you just take the medicine. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, obviously, retreat centers each have their own protocols and
Right, right.
ways of touching base with people, and many people actually have integration specialists now. So
Yeah,
Westerners are working with Indigenous people. So
right, right.
the maestros serving the medicine, singing the icaros, and then you have facilitators and integration specialists doing the screening and integration work afterwards.
Yeah,
Um, but prior to this
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of eagle and condor phase, you know,
Mm,
where our approaches have begun to merge,
yes. I
that
see.
wasn't the case. But now it seems like we're both learning from each other.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're integrating is what's
Yeah, we
happening.
are.
To be, I mean,
Exactly.
I was just talking to somebody the other day when we were exchanging emails, and you know, and I think we were even talking about it like before we hopped on this call, or maybe it was in this call. I'm not too sure. But like, so right, because the lineages that have been practicing ayahuasca, right? They're not just practicing the ayahuasca. You know, that's the thing that a lot of Westerners are, I think, beginning to find out, or really cut off from, is
Mhm.
that there's that whole dieta, master plant diet process. So they're cleaning their bodies, they're sitting and concentrating with a certain plant, they're learning to observe and listen. I believe the dieta process is a giant mindfulness practice, you know,
Mm,
and
mhm.
they're doing all this work, you know, to get ready for the ayahuasca, you know. And with ayahuasca tourism, there is not that most of the time. You just come there, show up, and you take the medicine. So I do think
Right.
that's one thing, although that doesn't really have too much to do with pre-screening. I think that has to do more with like a cultural thing and
Hmm.
cultural differences, and the kind of the consequences we're seeing of that not being integrated. So, and
Right.
because these people have grown up with it and it's in their lineages, they don't really need a pre-screening. This is a part of their life. They don't even
Right.
need the word integration. They're connected
Right.
to the earth. They live in the jungle. They don't treat the earth like crap. That's what we
Right.
do.
Right.
So when we take this medicine, there's a lot of our beliefs being challenged. We're like, oh shit, like look around. Climate
Hmm.
change is a real thing. And like we're stuck in this like I mean, I really do believe in Western medicine for a lot of things, by the way, so I don't want to sound like it's all trash, but it's completely different than, the plant medicine path. And they use all nature to treat everything, you know, and they really treat the body with respect. But us Westerners, you know, if you think about it, we come from a very emotionally cut off. We're cut off from the earth. We're not connected. So to take this medicine, it's challenging all of that.
Hmm.
So that's what we're trying to integrate on so many different levels. I'm not going into specifics, but you
Right.
get what I'm saying? Like culturally, we're just totally different,
Hmm.
so um I think that's also where the pre-screening process, also for safety, like we now
Right.
have seen probably too many situations where we're like, oh yeah, we need to do this differently. This isn't good. You know,
Right. For sure.
I don't know. That's my kind of semi take on it.
No, and that's wonderful, I mean, because safety should come first, right? If you're not safe, then you're not going to get anything out of these experiences.
Right, right.
It sounds really obvious, but it actually is just worth stating.
Yeah, yeah. No,
uh,
totally.
um, well, so we're getting to about an hour. I wanted to give you a chance to
Yeah,
plug some of the things that you're working on, because I know you've been a really busy bee.
yeah,
You've been organizing an ayahuasca preparation integration breathwork circles. Could you tell us a little bit more about
yeah.
how those are run, why you do it, and other projects you're working on?
Yeah, so right now I'm there's a couple things coming up. So there's a free ayahuasca preparation and integration workshop that will be on next week actually, and there'll be two times that people can attend.
Awesome.
And I'll give you the link to that so you can post it.
Perfect.
And then I'm also we just got done with the 3-month ayahuasca preparation and integration 3-month intensive,
Hmm.
and we go over everything in that group. You get 12 group sessions, 12 individual sessions, the foundations of breathwork or mindfulness breathwork, inner child and reparenting work. Um, we go through a dieta. You get a breathwork certification.
Hmm.
You get a ton of stuff in the 3-month intensive. It's just such an awesome program, and the community is amazing. And that will probably be starting that in October. So I'll give you the link for that as well. And then people can find my free like podcasts and YouTube's at my link that I'll give to you post below.
Awesome. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Awesome.
it's been a journey. I feel really honored to
Mm.
I feel very honored that there was people on this earth to be conscious enough and be connected enough to the earth to give us these medicines, and then for us Westerners to have the chance to have access to them, and to work with them consciously. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah, I'm so grateful.
for sure. For sure. That's a beautiful place to close it.
Yeah,
And I'm so grateful for you
I'm
and
so
for the
grateful for
work
you,
that you're
Jeremy.
doing.
Me too,
Um,
Jeremy.
and thank you so much for your time and your
Oh yeah,
wisdom, and all the work that you're doing. Why don't we stay online, but we'll stop the call here. Thanks
yeah,
everybody for watching.
yeah. Sounds
um,
good.
cool.
Cool. Yeah,
Thank you, sister.
yeah. Thank
Should we
you.
just, yeah, we'll just stop the recording, I guess.